Well, now they tell me that Clara Tuma is standing by with the defense counsel in this case. Let's go to Gainesville and find out.
Raymond, live and in person, as we promised for several minutes now. Dan Summer, the defense attorney in this case. Thanks so much for staying to talk with us. Mr. Summer, first of all, what's your reaction to the verdict?
We're glad. We're very glad.
And what was Stephen Kolokouris' reaction?
Relieved. Very relieved.
Now, you two shared what appeared to be a pretty emotional embrace as the verdict was still being read. Could you describe what that was about?
Well, it was a very emotional trial, a lot of high tensions, and he was very relieved that he was not convicted of the felony counts of aggravated assault. And we sort of anticipated a compromise verdict, and we were very, very happy to walk away with the reckless conduct conviction.
Jeffrey Williams from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference just told us he'll be going to federal court to try and seek federal civil rights charges against Mr. Kolokouris. What's your reaction to that?
I'll just defer to the United States Attorney's Office and the Justice Department. If they review the transcript, I think it'll be obvious there was no racial motivation in the case, notwithstanding the testimony of what's-her-name.
And, of course, what's-her-name being the former girlfriend of the defendant who testified. Let me go right to that question. Then she testified yesterday, said that your client was a racist. Why did you not bring in a witness after she testified to try and counteract what she said?
We discussed that, honestly, and we felt that this trial needed to come to an end, and I didn't really think that her testimony, while obviously damning, really necessitated a response. The evidence of his innocence on the particular charges that we were concerned about was so overwhelming that we didn't feel that her allegations dignified a response.
You said you were expecting a compromise verdict. Why was that?
The jurors obviously, I don't say obviously, I felt the jurors heard enough evidence to raise a question about whether or not he should have perhaps waited a second or two longer to see if Mr. Butler was going to actually come into the store or what he was going to do, and that may have played some role in it. I spoke to one of the jurors, and I think their feelings were they didn't want Stephen to have a gun, and by finding him guilty of reckless conduct, that may have resulted in his license taking away. Although it's interesting, we're doing some research right now. I think that the reckless conduct statute, and I'll need to do some more research, but I think that statute's been declared unconstitutional. And if it has been, then obviously we'll bring that authority to the court and ask that the conviction be immediately vacated and then Mr. Kolokouris be released from custody.
I'm sorry, the charge on which they just convicted him, you say, is unconstitutional? Why did you not realize that before it went to the jury, if that's true? You
know, it's interesting. I remember a case where I think it was the disorderly conduct being held unconstitutional, and we spoke about it. And I can't really say it was anything brilliant on my behalf, but it was certainly the lesser of the charges, and had the jury not had a compromise count, then it could have been a lot worse. So, I mean, I don't really want to take any credit for it because I really don't know the answer right now. I've got to, having Elizabeth do a little research, but if that's the case, then sort of blind luck, I suppose. But I'll advise you further when we find out.
Now, you said that the jury may have been trying to keep Stephen Kolokouris from owning a gun in the future. Is that grounds for an appeal?
No, not at all. I mean, whatever a jury does in deliberation is sacrosanct, and unless there's some kind of, you know, misconduct or some kind of violation of the rules that pertain to jurors, you can never impeach a verdict with you know, a juror's statement. So.
Well, is that right? Does the conviction preclude him from owning a gun in the future?
No. It's a misdemeanor conviction. Wouldn't have any effect whatsoever.
Why do you think he was taken into custody on a misdemeanor conviction?
I'll defer to Judge Fuller on that. I don't know.
Ever had a client convicted for a misdemeanor taken into custody before, like this?
Sure. DUIs. You got to go to jail if you get convicted of a DUI, Georgia.
Any other crime?
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but yeah, I've had a lot of people go to jail for misdemeanor convictions. Most often it's battery cases where there's some kind of domestic violence. And perhaps the judge felt because this did involve an allegation of violence and given the heated passions in the case, that it was an appropriate thing to do. I don't quibble with Judge Fuller. I like him very much, and he's a great judge, and he and I will be talking further about this once I have some research in my hand indicating what the constitutionality of the statute is. And I'm really not certain about that.
Well, another thing that you'll be discussing with Judge Fuller, no doubt, is the sentencing coming up. What will you be asking the judge to do?
time served. I think that's appropriate and a fair sentence.
And Mr. Summer, over the last couple of days, we've seen you making overtures to members of the African-American community, particularly some church leaders, and you've asked them to set up meetings, at least a meeting, so you and Mr. Kolokouris could go and speak to them. What was that? What do you hope to accomplish there, and why do you think that's important?
Well, I think it's important because it's always a good thing to open up a dialogue, especially when you have a situation like this where there's obvious racial animosity, whether it's grounded in fact or fiction. There are some hard feelings, and this is a bad situation, and there were going to be no winners with this verdict. And I told them that. I said, whoever wins, the other side is going to be, upset about it. And I felt early on, while there was no verdict, that it would seem more genuine, and it was genuine. Our offer to, if they would invite us to one of the churches, to go and have a kind of an open discussion, to air some of the feelings and perhaps begin the healing process and perhaps, make something good out of something bad. And they seemed receptive to that, and they're willing to talk about that, and that's something we're going to pursue further.
Do you have hopes of doing that before sentencing, or do you think you'll put it off until this case is concluded and then move on?
It'll happen if it happens at all after, obviously, Steve is released. He's incarcerated, so it would be difficult for him to attend any meeting while he's in the custody of the Sheriff's Department. But I spoke about that with Steve, and he was very receptive to it. He wants to make the effort to perhaps build some bridges. And this is a good community, notwithstanding a lot of the things some of the Yankees were saying. This is a good community. It's a tight-knit community. There are very good relations between black folks and white folks, and I respect their opinions and I respect their feelings, and I think they share their same feelings, and there's no need for divisiveness. And when you have an opportunity to move on and perhaps establish a dialogue, you ought to take that opportunity. I know President Clinton wanted to do something like this, and this is a perfect living example of how you can take something very bad and perhaps get some good out of it. So.
Which Yankees have been criticizing you that you've been objecting to?
That dude from New York saying we all tote 45s. Nancy will know what I'm talking about. Come on down, and I'll be happy to take you to lunch and show you we're not a bunch of rebel, redneck, gun-toting, flag-waving yahoos. It's a pretty decent place to live, and y'all can visit.
Will you appeal this verdict?
It depends. I really haven't made that decision. I think there are a number of very good grounds for appeal. And by the way, one of the jurors, one of the jurors said was they all thought that Montel was in a gang by the hash marks on his eyebrows. It was interesting that they picked up on that, even though we weren't allowed to go into that. So.
And that's interesting. The next subject I wanted to broach with you was the rather controversial decision on your part, and at least controversial in some quarters, to bring in the criminal history of Montel Butler, one of the alleged victims in this case. Describe for us why you thought it was important that this jury hear, one, from his alleged rape victim, and then two, from some teenagers who were involved in a fight with him.
Well, I wanted the jury to understand that Mr. Butler had violent propensities and would at least be capable of doing a holdup, which is a very violent act. And if they heard evidence that in the past he was capable of extreme violence, it wouldn't take much of a leap of imagination to see him sticking a gun in somebody's face. And frankly, I don't know if the boys were going to do an armed robbery or not. And as I said to the jury, it really doesn't matter, because that's what it appeared was going on. And anybody in Steve's position would have believed quite reasonably that this was an attempted holdup. And that was the whole point.
Do you think Stephen Kolokouris' testimony that he has no regrets and that he would do this again may hurt him come sentencing?
No.
Why?
Because frankly, he believed it was an armed robbery. He believed that at the time, and I guess he believes it now. And, it's really nice to stand here, months later and debate about what you would have done or I would have done. I mean, you have to make a split-second decision, and unfortunately, there's a lot of good officers who are no longer with us because they hesitated. The lesson of this case is don't play with guns, kids, because it's a bad thing to do, and it's very dangerous, and it causes problems. And, this is just one of the problems that it caused.
Okay, Dan Summer, thank you so much.
Sure, I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Raymond, you heard it. I'm sending it back to a Yankee back up in New York, just not the one he was complaining
I was going to say,
about.
I'm assuming not the Yankee to whom he referred, or you'd let me engage in the debate. But anyway, I don't know who that Yankee was. I guess you'll have to do more research and investigation. You always find out, get to the bottom of things.